This is Kelvin, talking with Andrew Lee of Rip to Shreds. I'm glad to talk with you, Andrew. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty all right. How about you, man?
Good. I'm actually at work right now. I have a break, and so like the time slots that are offered to do these interviews are usually when I'm working. So I really want to talk with you, and I really want to make time to talk with you, like
Hmm.
during my work day.
Hey, man, I appreciate that.
Awesome. So I wanted to just focus on Rip to Shreds. You have an album coming out, Jubian, I believe is how it's pronounced,
Yeah,
and that'll come
yeah.
out actually next week,
Yep.
October 14th.
October 14th on Friday. Yeah, we got it coming out then.
Awesome. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on that, and also for people who haven't heard Rip to Shreds or any of your other bands, I just kind of want to go into your background a little bit. Can you kind of talk about where you grew up, and kind of how you got into extreme music?
Yeah, I grew up in the Bay Area, in California, and I think I first started getting into extreme music like in high school. I think like around like 2004 or 2005. And at first I listened to like awful, mallcore, like In Flames when they were like super mallcore, or like Nightwish, all that stuff. And then it actually, I mean, I listened to some death metal back, like real death metal back then, like Vital Remains, or like some of the early Dismember stuff, but I didn't like really get into death metal the way I am now until maybe the last 6 or 7 years. But um, when I started going to shows around here, it's kind of funny because in the Bay Area, it's like it's got one of the biggest Asian populations in the whole US, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think San Francisco is like 40 or 50% Asian or something like that. But whenever I went to like metal shows, it's all like white kids. And I'm thinking, why aren't there more Asian kids in this area into metal? I mean, like when I was in high school and I talked to all my Asian friends, they're like, "Oh, metal, that's like angry white people music." So I think there's definitely kind of a stigma against metal among the among the non-whites in the area, at least.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about your family? How like did your family say anything about kind of like the music you were getting into?
I don't really think they had any real opinion about it. I mean, they were just like, "Oh, it's it's just noise."
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, my parents, they're like they're both Navajo from the Navajo reservation, and I think when I started getting into it, the only problem they had with it was probably just the imagery, like the skulls and
Mhm.
the demons and stuff like that. But yeah, like if I tried to listen to like Metallica with my dad, like he like just didn't care for it, or it all like just sounded like noise to him.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how some of the stuff that we might consider like really melodic today would have been just pure noise to people who don't really listen to metal.
Mm-hmm. Um, no, that's cool. I'm glad you kind of shared your background. And then you recently, well, not recently, like during the pandemic, you wrote a piece for I think the Decibel site about kind of like the stereotypes that were coming out during that time. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
so,
I wouldn't say that the stereotypes came out during that time, because those stereotypes, have been around forever. But you kind of see them get pulled to the forefront during the pandemic, especially because, at the time everyone was like, blaming China. Oh, the whole COVID, everything's from China,
mhm.
and then you would get reports of Asians like in New York or in San Francisco, getting attacked on the street like because Americans were looking for some kind of a scapegoat for the entire pandemic, um, and I guess that is kind of the impetus for the direct impetus, you know the band Brujeria, right?
Yeah, yeah. The Mexican their theme is like Mexican cartels playing
Cartel, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
playing metal. Yeah.
They put out a new song, and it was I don't remember the specifics of it, but it was like, oh, COVID is from like eating bats from China, all that stuff, and it pissed me off because these dudes know what it's like to be stereotyped by other Americans, and they're not a small band. Everyone knows who Brujeria is, so um it just really made me mad. And thinking about all the stereotypes, not just that were spreading right at that time, but just have been around for Asians ever since we've been in America. So that's kind of why I felt like I wanted to write this essay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on the new album, you have well, I don't know if Race Trader was that something that was like was that fueled by that, or was that kind of like a separate kind of lyrical
That's a
theme?
bit separate.
Okay.
So that song's more about like um you know when you talk about other Asians in as an Asian in America, other Americans, they will kind of take that and use it against other Asians. So if you say something like, it's like a big stereotype that, that back in Asia, Asians are hella racist to each other, but if you kind of say that in front of other white Americans, they'll take that as a kind of a license to, bring up all sorts of different stereotypes, and they'll point to you like, oh, look, the Asians here think that Asians are super racist too. And so it kind of feels like, you can't really talk about or criticize or really address problems in your own community um, without it being used against your community by mainstream America.
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, I got a little sidetracked. Going back, that's good. Thanks for clarifying that. Let's see. Yeah, going back to the stereotypes, did you, I know you mentioned like the Brujeria thing online, but did you like experience any like just mistreatment or just bullshit like around that time, like the past, I guess 2020, 2021?
Well, I barely go outside, but you always get those kind of comments online. I've been lucky enough that I rarely experience those kinds of things in person, especially, in the Bay Area. It's like or the Bay Area is full of Asians. But I mean, you still get ignorant comments, right? Like people are surprised you speak English, or they're like, "Oh, comrade," and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Um, I came up with a question, just kind of like before this, but what would be like what would be like the most comical or just kind of like silly like stereotype that you've heard? I mean, I'll tell you mine with like for like with Native American people, like I always get the comment that like, we live, the government like basically pays us to exist and we don't pay taxes, and like, all our colleges like paid for, but I had student debt and I pay a bunch of taxes, but but like what's kind of like a just like a silly like or just like comical stereotype that you've like come across or seen or heard?
I mean, I guess for me, it's kind of tough to think of him as comical, but one that I always notice because it's just so prevalent uh, is like the R and the L switching. Where where people think we when we say words that start with L, we switch it around to start with R. And it's especially, you know, because it is a kind of a language feature that is in Japanese, because they don't have that they don't have like a real R or real L. They have a vowel that a consonant that's kind of like in between. But you know, when you see they kind of generalize it to all Asians, and you know, most Asian languages don't have that at all. And then you know, Dragon Force was like super popular in the late 2000s, right? I mean, they're still super popular now, but you know, I remember there was that like one meme video about Herman Lee going around, you know, and they had this dude with like a fake Asian accent going, you know, I'm Herman Lee and I'll shit on your head, and then it's just kind of dumb because you know Herman's like a Chinese dude. I mean, he was born in I'm not sure if he was born in Hong Kong or in the UK, but he grew up in the UK, and you know, he speaks normal English. Doesn't have I don't know, man.
Yeah, that is kind of it's kind of absurd, yeah, that people do that. Another like stereotype that kind of, well, I guess it kind of, I didn't really know it was prevalent, like because I started like going into like the like medical side of like my education, and then I started to notice like, you know, the medical like people, like you know, mainly academic medical people are, they do like kind of have a lot of like racial yeah, like stereotypes like regarding to like disease and like lifestyle. And so I started to pick that up. Like I'm like, oh yeah, like people kind of think the people where I'm from are, you know, just a bunch of alcoholics and diabetics, and then with like, you know, the like African American community, you know, there's like there's certain like diseases that are prevalent, yeah, in that community, but like sickle cell. And so I started noticing like, yeah, well, it's kind of, I kind of had to fight through that like when I was going through like school. So but as far as like you being a musician, especially in metal, like like I mean, other than the online stuff, like any, has there been any like like stereotypical or like, you know, racial like misunderstandings like when you've played live shows or anything like that?
We're lucky enough that when we perform, you know, we performed mostly in California or in Seattle, and I guess, and a couple of shows in Taiwan. But you know, those are all kind of very liberal places. You know, there's a ton of Asians out here. Next year we're going to Europe. That I mean, I've heard mixed. So you know, just playing shows in California, it's not a big deal. I've heard stories from friends of mine in bands from Asia who toured Europe, had kind of a less positive experience, but you know, we'll see how it turns out next year.
Okay, cool. So next year, are you going to be like supporting Rip to Shreds, or I know you're involved with some other projects?
Okay.
Okay.
Rip to Shreds is going to be on tour next year in Europe.
Okay, cool. But yeah, I can switch to kind of like the new album. Well, first, you are going to have your album on Relapse. How did that come about? Relapse Records.
Yeah. So there's this guy, Mike. I believe he's like head of direct sales at Relapse, and he runs his own label called Horror Pain Gore Death. And I think like 2019 or 2018, like he reached out to me about doing some release on his label, and we put out I put out I did this split with my friends from Taiwan, Brain Corrosion, and Mike put it out on his own label. And then when we were when I started the writing process for the new album, it was kind of like, Pulverized has been great to us, but I think we've kind of outgrown them a little bit, and it's time to look for, like a bigger US based label. And then so I just reached out to Mike and I'm like, hey, do you think Relapse would be interested in taking on our new album? And then so he goes and talks to the big cheeses, and they come back and like, yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, Relapse is one of my favorites. Yeah, pretty much anything they put out is just like gonna be good. Yeah, I did pre-order the Rip to Shreds album too, so I'm looking forward to that. And then I heard the promo copy. I got the promo copy and like been listening to it a lot in before this scheduling this interview. And then I think I read it in the bio that came with the promo. Is this the first album with like a lineup? Because before it was just you, right?
Yeah. So this is the first album with a real lineup.
Okay.
So, I mean, writing wise, I'm still doing like the majority of the writing, but after I come up with like the basic guitar riffs and the basic arrangements, then I can hand it over, to my drummer and my bassist, and they can put their own stamp on it. They can point out things I wouldn't necessarily notice by myself, if like I think there were a couple of songs, where they were like, this part goes on for too long, we got to shorten it, or they can keep me in check, like that riff kind of sucks, let's swap it out for a better one. And then also I use less mental energy trying to come up with all of the parts myself, when I can hand it off to Ryan and Brian, and they can really totally focus and put their own ideas onto it. That takes pressure off me, so I can focus on the things that I'm doing, like maybe the first album and the second album, the bass parts are like pretty basic, I'm just following the guitar riff, but because Ryan's not doing anything but playing bass when he's coming up with his bass parts, he has that mental capacity to kind of be free, come up with creative parts. He doesn't just need to think about following the riff, because he's not trying to, think about everything else at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I really dig this album. And then just like, well, for me, just when I listen to it, it's got a really like a big Swedish like death metal influence. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's most obvious, in our guitar tone, because I'm using for this album, I actually used two custom HM2s, not a stock one. But I mean, the biggest part, obviously, is the actual chainsaw HM2 sound.
Yeah.
I still am very influenced by Entombed, but I would say, in terms of like the actual notes and the arrangements, at this point we have not very much in common with Entombed. I mean, obviously, we still have a couple of songs where it's like, okay, we just want to do some really stupid, groovy Entombed shit, and we'll still do that. But I think at this point, when I'm writing songs, I'm already kind of my headspace is already really far out of just Swedish death metal.
All right, cool. Yeah, and on like the lead guitar too is pretty sick. I like the lead guitar work on Race Trader.
Mm-hmm. That one is definitely more of like a Melodeath kind of thing. The Japanese band Intestine Balism.
I'm not familiar now.
So they're like they're a melodic death metal band. I think their first album came out in like 97 or something, and
Okay.
then they had like 3 albums. But they really uh the way they approach melodic death metal is, they still have all the death metal riffs. They just throw in a ton of melodic guitar leads on top of that. And, I really enjoy that. I'm not so much about the whole Gothenburg type of sound anymore. I mean, I still love Slaughter at the Soul, but, it's not something that I consciously want to emulate for Rip to Shreds.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I'm really just fan of like what I've heard. And um as far as like, supporting this album, I know you mentioned you're gonna support the album in Europe. Have you had any plans to like support a tour like across the country or anything like that? The US, sorry.
We, I mean, we're definitely going to play a couple of shows. As of yet, we don't have like a big tour scheduled for the US yet. Might change, but at least not planned for 2023 yet.
All right, cool. Um, but yeah, everyone should check out the new album that comes out October 14th on Relapse. The album's Jubian. Um, one thing I dig about like just like metal in general is just like the album art, and the album art is just pretty amazing. Um,
Yeah, that was done by a painter from Beijing called Guangyang, and then he did the cover for this one. He did the cover for the last album too. I really enjoy working with him because he always has these, really striking kind of. He has a really striking style. I like the way that he uses color, and it's not like one of those. I mean, I love Seagrave. Everyone loves Dan Seagrave, but
yeah,
Seagrave has a very particular style, and when you see a piece, that it's Seagrave, or that it's someone ripping off Seagrave. And I like that Guangyang has his own individual style. I feel like if you showed me like 2 or 3 of his pieces mixed in with like 50 others, you could point out all of his. And then since at least for me, the themes of the band has to all work together. It doesn't really make sense for me to sing about Chinese history or Chinese culture and just have any old cover. So for me, it was really important for me to have someone who understood that working on the cover.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, like the cover, and then yeah, the lyrical content, like you mentioned. Um, you do have some like history, I believe, through in the lyrical content, which is pretty awesome. I dig that. Um, I know you're. I'm gonna kind of ask about some of your other bands. I know earlier.
Sure.
Well, I first kind of got introduced to your music. It was the Pharmacist that came
Mhm.
out this year. How did you How did you become part of the Pharmacist project?
Oh yeah. Let me see. I'm trying to remember when I first started talking to Stefan. Maybe a couple of years back. I think he asked me to do some guest solos for, I think, the Feeling Young split um, with Fluids, and then I had a lot of fun with it. And I guess when he started working on the new Pharmacist album, he asked me, "Hey, do you want to do like all the leads on this one?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, man!" Because for me, it's writing leads for Rip to Shreds, or actually for any of my own bands. It's something that I have to consciously plan around. I don't want to write a song and then basically I finish a song and then, then I go back and look for a place to put a solo. That doesn't work for me. If I want to put a solo in a song, I have to write around that. I have to think, okay, in this solo, I'm going to have in this song, I'm going to have a solo. I'm going to build up to this solo, and the solo is going to, it's going to mean something. It's not just, there to have a solo. And then what was fun for me about this Pharmacist album, is that I don't need to think about any of that. Stefan just gave me, here's a bunch of songs, put solos in them. And it let me kind of explore things in solos that I don't really get an opportunity to do in Rip to Shreds, especially because he threw a whole bunch of like really weird wonky riffs at me. And when I write sections for solos in Rip to Shreds, usually I'm keeping it really simple and melodic underneath so that I have ample space to do something melodic. And then, I've got this crazy chromatic shit that Stefan's throwing at me. So I need to kind of think of ways to solo around it, which, it was a challenge, but I think it turned out really good.
Yeah, it's awesome. I dig that style, that gore grind style, and yeah, with your lead work, it just is a good finishing touch to that. I know I don't have a whole lot of time, but is there any like albums or music that you've been listening to a lot that you think people should check out?
Oh yeah, I mean that new Dream Killer album from Summerlands,
Oh
dude,
yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
so
I got
fucking
that.
good.
Yeah. The singer changed from the previous album, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
almost like a new band.
it's the one from Magic Circle. But yeah, that's new Summerlands album is like one of my favorites this year. The new Autopsy album that just came out. It's like it's the best album they've done since like Shit Fun, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and then of course, everyone's talking about Chat Pile right now, but
Mhm.
I got to plug Chat Pile. I'm friends with the guitarist. He's an awesome dude. They made such a ridiculous album. So if I had to pick three, it would be those three.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I don't think I've checked out the chat pile yet, but I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, I
I
mean, you
mean,
got it, man. It's more on the noise rock side of things, like maybe halfway between like noise rock and sludge, I
mhm.
guess. But you know, it's I feel like it's one of the most hyped albums of the year, and it absolutely lives up to it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much music coming out every month. I mean, the only thing I think I've been listening to like pretty regularly. Um, I mean, I listen to pretty much any band that comes out of Texas, and there's one band from Texas, I Am. They put out Eternal Steel, and
Mm-hmm.
another Texas band, Tribal Gaze. Yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
always gonna check out whatever band coming out from Texas. But I'm from Arizona. There's not a whole lot of like national bands from Arizona, other than Gate
Uh,
Creeper. But
Max Cavalera lives there, right?
oh yeah, he lives in like Phoenix. Yeah. He's I think they're doing the Cavalera tour. I'm gonna check out the Tucson show, this
Mm-hmm.
month, Tucson, Arizona show. Um, but yeah, he's probably like the biggest one. And I think Dave Mustaine also lives in Phoenix. Um, yeah,
I have a hard time imagining Dave Mustaine. I don't know
um,
why. It just doesn't seem to fit my image of Dave.
yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, I think that's all my time with you, Andrew. Thank you again.
For sure.
All right,
Thanks so much,
cool.
man.
Yeah, this is